There's a screenshot from that last part of the VVV video. And this sort of aggregation of these bouncing lines into different topologies of levels to navigate starts to become like these interesting abstract mathematical concepts. When I looked at Portal 2, right, I was thinking about dropping from one bridge onto another bridge, and the reason that works is because of actually something in our real world, our big world that we live in, right? Those two light bridges are like lines, and those lines intersect in two dimensions, in x, y, but then they're offset in the vertical, right? That's interesting, just of itself, but it also says something about lines in our universe. And as a player, after I have played that game, I know a little more about lines in our universe, right? This thing, instead, I don't necessarily know how it applies to anything real, but I still appreciate it, and that's interesting. So, what we are looking to do is to build systems. A game is a system of rules that generates behavior, and explore the consequence of those systems in a way that mathematicians might. And then, to have a fun game, or an interesting game, or an engaging experience, we find the best way to present those results that we found to the player, so the players can rediscover the best of what we had discovered. So, how do you do this? You have to start somewhere. And what we were saying is you can really start anywhere. It doesn't have to be a very specific idea. It could be. You could have a game mechanical idea like, I want to have a character with a grappling hook that he can latch onto ceilings and pull himself there. And you might start exploring that. But you also might start somewhere very vague, like, I want to make a puzzle game, and I want one of the puzzles to be about music, like the player has to remember a melody for a long time, but I don't know how he shows the game that he remembered it yet, and I don't know what happens when you show that you remembered it, but I just know that I want that music. Anything like that is okay for what we're talking about. Now, once you have started with this very beginning of an idea, there are a number of ways that you could chase it, follow it in different directions. I'll show an example in a minute. But as you start to chase it, you want to chase it in the direction that is the richest, the direction that seems to have the most new things to discover and to show people, right? And when you go in that direction, you want to explore completely. You want to find everything that you can. And then, as I've said, you want to take all those things that you found and present them to the player in a clean, engaging, and exciting way. So here's an example from Mark's game, Negakure. He knew that he wanted to make a game that was four-dimensional. And since the idea was about dimensions, he didn't want the game to have a lot of complicated rules, because the point is to be four-dimensional. It's not to have a lot of rules. And that was really all that he knew. It's a very simple starting point. So the question is how do you know where to go from there, right? Well, he had read some books. There's a very famous book called Flatland by Edwin Abbott, which is about higher dimensional beings visiting a lower dimension. And Mark knew from that and other works of science fiction that one often cited consequence of being able to move in four dimensions is that you can travel through walls. And actually, you don't travel through the wall, you move around it in the fourth dimension and you come back to the regular three dimensions. But you can do things that would be impossible for normal people. And so he knew that that should be able to happen somehow in his game. But not only did he know that, he used that as a test. He said, whatever game mechanics I implement, I know that I'm on the right track if I can start to reproduce these things that we already know are a consequence of moving in four dimensions. Right? So his first idea was just to implement a button control where you press a button, because human beings can only see three dimensions at a time, right? So somehow you have to work the fourth dimension in there, and what he did was you press a button and it swaps your third dimension out with a fourth one, and that's all you can do is swap them back and forth. And it turned out that that was a good idea. Let me show you how that works. So this is a higher production value version of the first level that he built. The original game didn't have these characters in it, but he's standing here. This is his character on the left, and there are some people fighting on the right side of the map near that orange exit, which is also where the player wants to get. So the goal is to, either get to the exit or stop the thief, but there's a big wall in the way and you can't jump over it. So what do you do? Well, you have this control, so you press this button and it shifts your view so that your view now moves along the fourth dimension. And it turns out that there's another world. There's this lush green grassy world where the player started, and now there's a desert world just 1 unit away in the fourth dimension, sandwiched with the world where he started out. So now that he can see it, he can move there. And then press the button again. And now he's walking around in the desert world. Now, this world doesn't have an exit gate, and it doesn't have a wall in it, but because the light is shining along the fourth dimension, you can see the shadows of those things, and that helps you navigate. So now he can walk to the other side of this wall. He can just walk right through it, because it's not there. And now he can just reverse the sequence of how he got here. Press the button, go back into the other universe, the thief's running away now, and switch back. So, once you've got something like that, that's pretty good. You have a sort of a test bed. Like, in order to implement that level, he needed to build an engine where you could swap dimensions around. He needed to have a way of entering new levels. And once he could build this level, he could build a lot of levels. So he just started playing with the idea, right? And what he saw, as soon as he started playing with the idea, was that he could build a lot of levels that had consequences that were unexpected, that you don't read about in books, but were straightforward. So for example here, it's a little hard to see, but this wall is 2 units high, and the player's standing on it, and this is a non-player character. What he found was that if you set up the map in the right way, then you can actually get up higher by being higher in the fourth dimension. You can use that to get higher in this dimension, right? That was actually pretty straightforward, but it's not something that you hear about in these books. But that's exciting because he started with a basic game mechanic. He made it more specific to reproduce something he knew could happen, and then it created new consequences that he didn't think about before he had implemented it. And that is the new part. That's the magic, is when you start seeing new things that you as the game designer did not plan to implement, right? That's how you know you're on the right track. And from here, he continued designing and found all sorts of great stuff. So now I'm going to give an analogous story of how I started with my game, The Witness. When I started, similarly, I had very vague ideas about what I wanted to do. I knew it was going to be a first-person puzzle game where you explore an open-world environment, and I knew that I wanted puzzles to be well-marked so that if you saw one from far away, you knew what it was. If you walked up to it, it would be obvious how to interact with it, which is something that most adventure games don't have true in them, So I decided I wanted these puzzles to be a touch interface, like an iPad or a phone, something people understand pretty easily. And you do something with it, and then you solve the puzzle, and I don't know what that something is, but since it's a touch interface, I guess drawing a line seems good. So let me think about drawing a line. How do you do that? What's it like? Well, it could be free-form drawing, but I knew that free-form drawing would look something like this. If you've ever tried to draw in Photoshop with just a little paint brush, it's actually kind of, in one continuous line, it's actually kind of hard to make anything that doesn't look ugly.